The Timeshift.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Timeshift. This week we're reviewing the latest episode of Doctor Who, the grand season finale, Empire of Death. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below and you read out in next week's show. And also while you're there, be sure to tell me about what you thought about the season as a whole, as next week's video will be my season-wide review. But between then and now, let's get into the review itself by talking about the story, the writing and tangentially related matters. Just very quickly, because we are starting to get into summer, I have got the window open, I've got a rather rattly fan working in the background, so if you hear any weird noises, that's where they're coming from. So with all that said, to talk about the episode itself with some kind of more headline statements, I have to say that this was a perfectly fine ending to a perfectly fine season. It didn't knock my socks off and it didn't really do anything for me in the grand scheme of things, but it was fun for what it was. The closing act works on an emotional level, and I feel that pretty much everything to do with Sutekh was kind of flimsy, but we'll get onto that shortly. This is the grand season finale, the end of the season, the grand finale of everything, or at least the grand finale of the previous episode. I will say is that here and now, looking at this on the more macro level, I have to say is that it does a better job of wrapping up and dealing with the existence of a season-long mystery than previous other Russell T Davies season enders. Like, even though I still feel that the season-long mystery thing in the Russell T Davies era, both then and now, seems to be just boiling down to say the magic word in the background, then in the final two episodes we'll actually talk about the magic word. At least this time it does feel as though there has been some kind of mystery here that there's been attempts to solve, even if the attempts to solve it have only really happened over the past couple episodes to a serious degree, with everything to do with Sutekh ultimately just feeling like, well, we need some kind of big villain to wrap all this up, so who have we got? Who can we get? Who can we go back and the people will go, ooh, I remember that person, they were spooky scary, let's go with Sutekh, grand. I will say is that the big build-up to defeating Sutekh was, and I hate to say it, but this is going to become the ultimate defining phrase for this season of Doctor Who, is it was perfectly fine. Look, as is the case with pretty much every Doctor Who story, classic or modern, the grand solution at the end of the day was the Doctor plugs a thing into a thing and off goes the bad guy. It was a problem in the classic series, it's a problem in the modern series. It doesn't matter whether this is the end of 4 episodes in a serial or the end of the 40-minute episode up until this point. The Doctor finds a way in defeating the bad guy by just getting a thing that he found in the episode, and oops, there goes the bad guy. This great incomprehensible threat has been magicked away by shenanigans and tomfoolery. That's just how Doctor Who works, but still I will say is that I am kind of disappointed by it, because it feels as though, given the sheer scale of threat that they show throughout this episode and how they go out of their way to underline just how Sutekh was defeated the last time and how they need to find something new and different to defeat him now, at the end of the day, they just end up doing the exact same thing, but with a better visual effects budget. And I did notice that in the little flashback thing they were showing on the TV set, which was showing an angle from a television camera, because that's how we do flashbacks in television, and also in movies as well, people seeing it from angles and recordings that they would never be able to do, that in the little vortex thing that Sutekh was walking through, they use modern special effects, not the weird rainbow ring thing that he was stepping through before. And of course, they just chuck Sutekh off into the time vortex to defeat him once and for all. Something that we've seen Captain Jack, Salamander, and a dinosaur survive. Yes, Captain Jack has some kind of time-space wibbly-wobbly nonsense to protect him, but Salamander was just a man. And a dinosaur is just a dinosaur. It wasn't a particularly special dinosaur. It was just a T-Rex, and they survived it. So yeah, I wonder how Sutekh is really gonna handle all of this. But of course, we needed a way to defeat him, and I suppose that putting a leash on the giant evil doggo was as good as we get. And I will notice that they didn't even make a joke about the fact they were putting a leash on the big giant doggo bit. Like, my eyes rolled when I saw them doing it, but the absence of a joke, even though it might have pissed me off, kind of feels conspicuous by its absence. Look, the way that they defeated it feels totally in keeping with modern Doctor Who and classic Doctor Who to a certain degree. There was a quirky sense of humour to it, but I still wish there was something a little bit more here, that we weren't just doing the exact same thing more or less as we did last time, but this time with a special effects budget. The Doctor just dragging through the time stream because they did, because that's what ultimately ended up solving the big problem, the fact that everyone was fucking dead. Look, last week I was concerned as to how they would handle Sutekh, and I had questions as to how he actually became a god, and to Russell T Davies' credit, he did explain that by Sutekh being attached to the TARDIS for so long that they ended up drawing upon the power of the time vortex and eventually growing into become an actual god. That's an fascinating, interesting, and scary idea that I really love the idea of. I just wish that this had ended up being just demonstrated and translated in a way which is more than just recycling some stock footage from the classic series, but hey, whatever will work with it, it gets the point across. And I have to say that the portrayal of Sutekh from a writing point of view was perfectly fine. I do feel that the echoes of lines from previous appearances felt a little bit heavy-handed. Sure, it wasn't quite the remember Star Wars thing, remember ATST's thing of just referencing and just having them repeat the classic iconic lines, but it was still not that far off. It was like a couple streets down from that they even had the "that is my good" line from the "that is my good" speech I referenced in the previous review. And hey, maybe my feelings towards the whole writing of Sutekh would have been better had I been able to understand a word he was bloody well saying. Look, I know that the voice actor portraying him is in his 90s, but I have to say is that he can do it. He can still do it. He still pulls off a good vocal performance, so I don't understand why they put all those effects on his voice. Did they think that he didn't sound spooky and scary enough when, to be quite honest, I think he sounds spooky and scary enough without all the guttural groans and weird noises that they're putting on top of it. He added something that didn't need to be added and just ultimately undermines that performance and to the writing to a certain regard. With that said, Sutekh doesn't really do much in the episode beyond just having his minions cause everything to rot and turn to dust. He just spends almost the entirety of the episode hunched over the TARDIS like it's his precious or something. Sutekh unleashing his evil across time and space is a great visual. How the plan came into existence is haunting. Though, you know, how do I end up putting this? I will say is that pretty much at the start of the episode, when you saw everyone in Unit and everyone in London biting the farm, or buying the farm I should say, and biting the dust, you knew the Doctor was going to end up undoing all of it. It was just an inevitability, and yes, that was always going to be the case because he's the hero and he's going to save the day, but I don't know, maybe had they saved that grand mass killing of everybody to the end of the previous episode, then maybe it would have a greater impact, because doing it right at the start of the episode just makes you think, okay, end of the episode, Doctor's bringing everybody back, because he has to, because we can't just kill off the entirety of Unit, especially not with characters we've literally just introduced. But hey-ho, the methodology that he used to save everybody was good. There was still a part of me, though, that whilst I'm watching this was expecting some greater twist with Sutekh's plan. Sutekh is destroying all of time here. He has all these little avatars, these little harbingers of his throughout time and space from whenever the Doctor has landed anywhere. And there's a part of me that was thinking that, well, wouldn't this create a paradox? And might this not create a level of destruction that he himself can't even comprehend? And maybe that in itself creates a paradox that ends up undoing his power, but that ultimately ends up not happening, and somehow the Doctor can travel to those other timelines, even though time and space is linear in Doctor Who, so there wouldn't be this grand database of DNA samples that Ruby would have her mother's DNA in, because quite simply, that stuff wouldn't have happened. But I guess it did, because we needed a way of finding out who Ruby's mother was. And also to do the big twist thing where she smashes the TV, I suppose. It does feel at the end of the day like Sutekh is only here because we needed a classic villain to end the series. Someone grand to build up the stakes and make us feel terrified, but I feel that ultimately their villainous nature and what they ended up contributing to the episode was rather minimized. There was a greater focus on Ruby Sunday and her mother, which I will say I think is certainly the far more interesting part to this episode. I do have to say is that Sutek's obsession with Ruby's mother is odd, especially in hindsight. It would have been one thing had he been obsessed with her because he had some kind of psychic connection to Ruby, and because she didn't know who her mother was, he couldn't comprehend that, and it was driving him crazy. But he's been attached to the TARDIS for centuries. He's seen everything, so he would have seen her at some point. He would have been able to see her and what was going on, unless time and space in some way slipped in a way that he himself cannot process because he's not a fourth-dimensional being. And well, let's be honest, given how many copies of Susan Twist there are through time, he would have ended up killing her mother anyway, so why would he care at all? I will admit that the reveal that Ruby's mother is just a normal woman is something that I'm perfectly fine with. I honestly think that as twists go, it's probably one of the strongest ones that we've had in modern Doctor Who, which is weird when you think about it. For a TV series that's grand twists for many of its companions have ultimately boiled down to, oh, they're secretly a god, or they're secretly someone that has waited through time or space, or they've been manipulating the Doctor's timeline for all this history to get them to where they are. At the end of the day, the grand mystery is that they're just a normal person. That Ruby Sunday is just a normal human person, and her mother is just a normal human person. But even still, with that in mind, the whole mystery and the presentation of the mystery makes very little sense in the context and the visual context that we see it in. This flashback that we've been seeing for the past couple of weeks or so takes place in 2004. We learn that Ruby, she was born as a result of a teen pregnancy, so you understand as to why she ended up dropping her off at the church. She couldn't cope with it, understandably, and we get the hints that her stepfather wasn't a good person and that her boyfriend at the time couldn't deal with all of this, so makes sense as to why she ended up going down the path she ended up doing so. But look, my memory might be fading in certain areas, but I remember 2004. I'm about the same age as Ruby Sunday's mother, and I know for damn certain that we weren't wearing big spooky cloaks in 2004. Why the hell is she wearing that? I would have been a little bit more forgiving of it had the pictures that we've seen of her suggested that she was a little bit more gothic and creative and avant-garde and bohemian in her appearance and how she did stuff, but she isn't. She just looks like any other normal person that you see on the streets in the UK. So why is she wearing this big spooky cloak? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. And why did she do such a dramatic, spooky point to the road sign? Like, the way that it's done, it makes it feel as though that is specifically for a message. And when you see Ruby holding the TV set and she's pointing, she's almost always pointing at Ruby or pointing at the Doctor whilst all that's going on, which makes it feel as though it was hinting to something else there. Like, that visual image of this woman wearing this big, dark, spooky cloak and pointing enigmatically feels like it should be a part of a grander storyline, that the person involved with it should be far spookier and scarier than we understand, but that isn't the case. She was just a normal teenage girl that for whatever reason decided to dress like an extra from some kind of horror movie and then do something big and dramatic for the benefit of whom? Because I suppose you could make the argument it was made for the benefit of the CCTV camera so that they would then see that and go, oh, she's pointing at the Ruby sign, oh, we'll call the kid Ruby. Though the church was on Ruby Road and that's where she gets her name from, so oh, she named you after all? Okay, sure, whatever. And in the context of all of that, you know, the TARDIS just appears behind. Oh no, they're going to just say that it was out of the visual range and that she didn't notice it was over 73 yards, and as such, she didn't see or hear the TARDIS landing. That's what they're going to go with, aren't they? Oh, yeah. Shit, yeah, that's what they're doing. Oh, bugger. Oh, God. See, it feels to me, it genuinely feels to me that that Russell T Davies had this big, bold, striking visual image set up ahead of time. This figure in the snow, wearing a cloak, pointing enigmatically after a child has been left on a church doorstep. Oh, the mystery, oh, the horror, oh, the intrigue. And then decided after that, no, this person's just going to be a normal human being, and their child is just going to be a normal human being, and then decided to reinterpret those scenes in a more mundane light, but still kept the dramatic nature of everything going on there. Like, you could have been able to forgive the dramatic presentation of it had that been, oh, this is how Ruby's interpreting it. This isn't actually what it looks like. This is just fragments of Ruby's memory materializing themselves in a way in which feels typical, stereotypical in a way to her as to how she would expect something like that to go, and it's only when they went through the mind mirror that they ended up saying, actually, no, wait, it went differently, but that doesn't work because the Doctor saw her himself. Like, I like the whole sequence of Ruby meeting her mother in the cafe. I think that's a beautiful little moment, and the period where she, her mother, and her foster mother are getting to know one another. It's a sweet moment, and her leaving the Doctor and their final goodbye. Great for what it was, though maybe it would have had more of an impact had the two characters spent more time on screen getting to know one another. But as far as a one-season companion exit goes, fine. Perfectly fine. I think there's elements that were missing there. I still think the whole mystery regarding Ruby Sunday was mystery first, solution second. I dare say that this is another J.J. Abrams mystery box bullshit thing, but that feels like me putting words into someone else's mouth in a way. And just one more thing before we start pivoting into talking about performances, I'll admit I don't have much to say there. The scene with the Doctor on that planet was just odd. You know, the planet where the scene where the Doctor's in the tent with the woman whose mind is slowly rotting away because that's what's happening now. I liked the scene, I liked the tone of it. I think that the scene in and of itself is good as a moody, grim darkness to it, but it just still ends up feeling like a holdover from an older draft of the script. It just happens, there's no lead into it. We last see the Doctor screaming his heart out that he's doomed all existence, then all of a sudden he's on some random planet somewhere and here's someone in a tent, and I suppose that it was there to set up for a double bluff as to, oh, maybe this is Ruby's mother after all. Oh, it isn't. Okay. And it all just ends up existing just for the sake of the Doctor getting a spoon which he could quite easily have just found in the memory TARDIS. Okay, like, again, the scene in and of itself is good. It just doesn't work in the wider context of the episode. It ultimately, that entire scene feels as though it just exists for the sake of building up Sutek's power even more. Like, the preempting a future death battle episode between Sutek and Beerus, or whatever the name is from Dragon Ball Super, and they wanted, okay, he doesn't just disintegrate people and destroys people, he destroys memories and time as well. Ooh, okay, sure, we'll save that for later on, but in the here and now, this scene was good in and of itself, doesn't really add anything to the wider story, apart from adding a moment towards the end of it where she's back alive again with her baby. Okay, look, I just think something I want to add is that with the thing about Ruby and her mother, there was a part of me that was expecting that they'd end up revealing, and sadly she'd passed away in a car accident 2 years ago. And that itself would have been painful, bittersweet, but I think that it would have been at least something. It would have made the whole mystery feel a little bit more. But actually, no, that wouldn't work because in 2046, fuck it. Just fuck it. Moving on to the performances, Gatwa and Gibson were great. Gatwa, of course, he was able to show himself and his performative abilities far better in this episode than I think in the previous one. Though at the end of the day, much like the Dot and Bubble episode, he only really had one major scene where he was able to truly act and show what he can do as a performer. And Millie Gibson was the strongest that she's ever been, particularly towards the end of the episode. Beyond this, performance-wise, everyone did their best. Everyone did their damnedest, and there were no bum performances. With that said, let us get into the overview and just say that, look, I have a lot of issues with this episode, but at the end of the day, it's perfectly fine for what it is. it works enough, it sticks the landing enough, but there's nothing about it that elevates the material beyond the level that I think it needs to get to. It is good for what it is, but at the end of the day, it is nowhere near as good as it should be. Words, I think, echo towards my feelings of the season as a whole. With that said and done, it's time for Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner, the feature that at times is more interesting than the episodes they're talking about. Oh no! It's time for Comment Corner, and our first comment comes from Big X1, who says, I thought this episode was great. This, of course, referring to the previous episode. Looking forward to seeing how all this wraps up, and thank you for your comment. I hope that this episode ended up wrapping up for you as well as you expecting it to. Personally, it's fine. Look, it's fine. It's the most passive thumbs up I think I've given an episode of Doctor Who in a very long time. It's fine. Next up, we have I think it's Kofti sorry if I didn't get the name right. They say, that reveal of a classic villain is just wow. Also, Gabriel Wolf, who is in his early 90s, coming back to voice that character. Holy giraffe. Thank you for your comment. And at the time that the episode went out, I didn't know that they were bringing back the old voice actor. And the fact they brought him back, I think, is fantastic. They've still got it. What little I did hear of them underneath all the post-processing that they did to his voice, wholly unnecessary. I think that they had the necessary stage presence and gravitas in their voice acting to not need to the grip, the other stuff they put on it. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit away of myself and a little bit away with the fairies, but hey ho, this episode was fine, and well, God knows how I'm going to talk about this season next week. There's only so many ways you can say that's fine, it's fine, and build it out to a nearly 20-minute video, but we'll see. Thank you all for watching. Let me know what you thought about this episode and the season as a whole, and I'll get back to you in the comments, or you will be right in next week's video. If your comment is particularly long, I might have to do an abridged version of it when we get to that. But anyway, thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye!
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!